For years, my family called me a failure. They didn't know that I was the quiet founder. The woman who raised me leaned across the crisp white tablecloth of the French bistro, lifting her wine glass toward my sister's new fiancé with a polished, practiced smile. "Don't mind Darian," she said lightly, her tone smooth from decades of client dinners. "She's our long-term project. Still figuring out how the real world works." The fiancé, her name was Lila, didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. She just looked at me carefully, like someone examining a puzzle that didn't quite match the picture on the box. "My name is Darian Wolf. I'm 29 years old. And for as long as I can remember, I have been the quiet one in a family that only respected volume. The man who raised us built a boutique investment firm in Chicago. Polished floors, framed magazine covers, a constant hum of self-importance. My older sister, Maribel, was the heir apparent, the star pupil who mirrored everything they valued: confidence, connections, visible success. Their world revolved around appearances. They measured worth in portfolios, memberships, and the weight of a diamond ring. And then there was me. I didn't want to manage money. I wanted to build systems. I started a logistics software company alone, from a drafty studio apartment with unreliable heat and a folding desk that doubled as my kitchen table. My life was quiet, servers humming, cold coffee, long nights that blurred into early mornings. To them, this wasn't ambition. It was embarrassment. They saw my thrifted coats and skipped galas not as sacrifice, but as proof I couldn't keep up. I think they loved me in the abstract. But they were deeply ashamed of me in public. What they didn't know was that my quiet life was about to become very loud. Have you ever been treated like a problem to fix instead of a person to understand? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I read every one. The only reason we were at Le Marchand Rouge that night was Maribel's engagement dinner. She was marrying Lila, a senior partner at a Silicon Valley venture firm. Exactly the kind of person my family had always hoped Maribel would impress. To celebrate, they'd booked the private wine room. The air smelled like oak, expensive perfume, and expectation. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a merger. The woman who raised me dominated the conversation, exaggerating Maribel's recent deals. The man who raised me nodded along, chiming in with numbers that sounded impressive but meant nothing. They spoke loudly, confidently, and constantly. I sat quietly, moving food around my plate, wearing that familiar cloak of invisibility. Eventually, the attention turned to me. "Darian is still tinkering with her computer thing," the man said, patting my hand with gentle condescension. "We keep encouraging her to get serious." Maribel smirked. "We even offered her a junior role at the firm. Answering phones. Filing. You know, structure." Lila turned toward me, curious. "What kind of platform is it?" Before I could answer, the woman waved it off. "Oh, it's nothing special. Some app. Everyone has one these days. A hobby." They talked about me as if I weren't there. As if I were a case study in delayed adulthood. I didn't interrupt. I focused on the condensation sliding down my water glass, grounding myself. Then the bill arrived. The woman made a show of pulling out her card, glancing at me with a pitying smile. "Don't worry about this, Darian. You just save what you can. Rent isn't cheap." The message was clear: you are the burden. I nodded. Silence had always been safer. This wasn't new. It was just public. A month earlier, they'd hosted a massive summer party at their lake house. I found out through social media, everyone smiling, clinking glasses. Everyone except me. When I asked about it, the excuse came easily. "We didn't want you to feel overwhelmed. It was a high-level crowd." High level. Inadequate. It wasn't forgetfulness. It was containment. Even worse were the casual humiliations. Last 4th of July, the woman had laughed at a neighbor's barbecue. Maribel's taking over international accounts. And Darian? She's exploring herself. Air quotes. Laughter. I drove home alone that night with the sound echoing in my head. 3 days before the engagement dinner, Maribel called. "Hey," she said, sweetly. "I know money's tight for you. I can send you a few hundred. Buy something nice. First impressions matter." She didn't want to help me. She wanted to manage how I reflected on her. "I'm fine," I said calmly. And I meant it. What they never asked, what they never saw, was reality. While they played tennis, I was on pre-dawn calls with developers overseas. While they boasted about commissions, I was closing a funding round under strict confidentiality. My company, Nera Systems, was weeks away from final valuation. They heard software and assumed small. They didn't know global logistics firms were circling. That night at dinner, Lila kept asking real questions. What gap are you solving? What does your burn rate look like? My family shifted uncomfortably. Finally, the man sighed. We just hope she finds stability. Someone who can take care of her. Lila set down her fork. What did you say your company was called? She asked. Nera Systems, I replied. She froze. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was seismic. But that moment, that reckoning, comes next. For a moment, no one spoke. The wine room at Le Marchand Rouge had gone unnaturally still, like a theater right before the curtain drops. The clink of silverware from the main dining hall felt distant, as if we were sealed inside a glass box. Nera Systems? Lila repeated slowly, her voice no longer polite, focused. You're Darian Wolf. I nodded once. I didn't smile. I didn't explain. I'd learned long ago that explanations were wasted on people who never asked questions. The woman who raised me laughed, sharp and uneasy. That's our last name, yes, she said quickly. But I don't see. Lila ignored her. She pulled her phone from her clutch and swiped, her fingers moving fast, precise. Then she turned the screen toward the table. It was a trade article. Clean layout. Neutral headline. The silent infrastructure shift, how Nera Systems is reshaping global freight without marketing itself. Below it, a valuation estimate. 8 figures. The man who raised me leaned forward, squinting. This must be another company. Darian's been experimenting with code since college. Nothing serious. Lila looked genuinely confused. You told me your sibling was struggling. Maribel's face tightened. She is. She lives small. She never talks about work. That's because no one listens, Lila said calmly. The air in the room changed. Not explosively, quietly. Like pressure equalizing. I watched it happen the way I watched markets turn. Slowly. Inevitably. My firm has been tracking Nera Systems for months, Lila continued. No press. No interviews. No founder profile. Just performance. She looked at me again. You're deliberately invisible. Yes, I said. The woman who raised me stared as if I'd spoken another language. Why would you hide success? Because you taught me to, I thought. But I didn't say it. Maribel finally spoke, her voice brittle. If this is true, why didn't you tell us? I met her eyes. You never asked. Memory doesn't arrive politely. It barges in. I was 16 the first time I learned silence was safer. Maribel had missed a critical deadline for a school competition that mattered to the man who raised us. When he found out, he didn't yell. He looked disappointed, which was worse. She was overwhelmed, the woman said quickly, glancing at me. Darian can help. She's good with details. So I stayed up all night fixing it. Formatting, research, citations. When Maribel won, they praised her resilience. I wasn't mentioned. That became the pattern. At 18, I was asked to review documents for the firm. At 21, I was quietly correcting errors before audits. Never officially. Never acknowledged. You're dependable, the man told me once. Not everyone needs recognition. They taught me early that my value was usefulness, not presence. So when Nera Systems began to grow, I didn't announce it. I didn't celebrate. I didn't invite them in. I built walls. Back at the table, Maribel pushed her chair back slightly. This feels exaggerated. Lila turned to her. Your sibling's company is currently outperforming 3 firms my partners are invested in. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable. The woman who raised me tried to recover. Well, that's wonderful news, she said brightly. You should have told us, Darian. We could have helped. Helped. The word tasted bitter. You didn't even invite me to your lake house, I said quietly. But now you want proximity. Her smile faltered. The man cleared his throat. If this valuation is accurate, he said carefully, then there may be opportunities for collaboration. Family synergy. There it was. Not pride. Not apology. Utility. Lila leaned back, observing them the way predators observe weather. You've been dismissing a founder your own firm would beg for a meeting with. She looked at me again. And you let them. I didn't let them, I corrected. I chose peace. The bill sat untouched at the edge of the table. No one reached for it now. Maribel's eyes flicked between Lila and me. You could have said something before tonight. And ruin the show? I asked softly. That hurt her more than anger would have. I stood, smoothing my jacket. I have an early call. Zurich. Lila stood too. I'll walk you out. The woman who raised me opened her mouth, then closed it. Outside, the city air felt clean. Lila exhaled. I'm sorry, she said. For how they treat you. I nodded. You saw it. I did, she said. And it changes things. For you, I replied gently. Not for me. She smiled sadly. If you ever want to talk, professionally, I know where to find you. I know, I said. You already tried. As I walked away, I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter. Relief. But the story wasn't over. Because families that lose control don't retreat. They escalate. The first message came the next morning. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't pride. It was logistics. The man who raised me left a voicemail while I was on a call with Rotterdam. Darian, he said, his voice suddenly formal, measured. We need to talk. As a family. There are implications now. Implications. I deleted the message without replying. By noon, there were 3 emails from the firm's generic address. Not from him directly. Not from the woman who raised me. From their legal assistant. Subject line, clarification of intellectual property involvement. That's when I understood. They weren't embarrassed. They were afraid. Nera Systems had crossed a threshold overnight. The article Lila had shown them triggered something, attention. Quiet interest turned into open inquiry. My inbox filled with meeting requests I'd ignored for months. And my family realized something terrifying. They no longer knew where they stood in my life. I grew up believing family was a constant. You could disappoint them, embarrass them, be excluded by them, but they were always there, hovering, watching, waiting to pull you back into alignment. But success changes the gravity. It exposes motives. By evening, Maribel called. Her voice was softer than usual. Too soft. Darian, she said. I think last night got misunderstood. Did it? I asked. She sighed. We didn't know. You can't blame us for not reacting properly to information we didn't have. I can blame you for never wanting the information, I replied. There was a pause. Then she said, you've always been sensitive. That word again. Sensitive. Difficult. Independent. Labels used when people refuse to comply. We want to meet, she continued. Neutral place. Just us. No, I said. She sounded surprised. Why not? Because this isn't about connection, I said calmly. It's about access. Her breath caught. That's not fair. It's accurate. She lowered her voice. You're making this harder than it needs to be. There it was. The family rule. Compliance equals peace. I ended the call. 2 days later, the escalation began. A courier delivered a thick envelope to my office. Inside, copies of old emails. Early-stage code snippets. Meeting notes from years ago, documents from when I was still quietly helping the firm. Attached was a letter from their attorney. Polite. Professional. They were claiming partial intellectual contribution. They wanted leverage. I stared at the paper for a long time. Not because I was scared. Because I was disappointed. They couldn't celebrate me. They couldn't respect me. So they tried to own me. My legal team handled it in 20 minutes. Every line item was time-stamped, documented, separated. Nera Systems was built in isolation by design. I'd learned early that generosity without boundaries becomes exploitation. The response was brief. Firm. Final. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, city lights flickering against the glass. The same apartment they once pitted. The same life they'd called small. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Grief. Not for the people they were. For the people I once hoped they'd be. The next confrontation wasn't legal. It was emotional. The woman who raised me showed up unannounced. I hadn't given her my address. She stood in the hallway, eyes red, coat clutched tight. "You didn't have to humiliate us," she said the moment I opened the door. "I didn't humiliate you," I replied. "I told the truth." She stepped inside without waiting for permission. Looked around. Took it in. The clean lines. The quiet confidence. "You always wanted to prove something," she said bitterly. "No," I said. "I wanted to belong." She finally looked at me. And for the first time, I saw fear, not of loss. Of irrelevance. "You could fix this," she whispered. "You could help the family." I shook my head. "I already did. For years. For free." She reached for my arm. I stepped back. And that's when it broke. Tears. Accusations. Guilt dressed as concern. "You owe us," she said. That sentence changed everything. "No," I answered. "I survived you." She left without another word. Later that night, Lila texted. "They're calling everyone. Trying to control the narrative." I smiled faintly. Because narratives don't matter when the truth has momentum. And they were about to learn something painful. You can't silence someone who's already built in quiet. By the end of the week, the calls stopped. That should have brought relief. Instead, it brought something colder. Silence, when it's deliberate, is a weapon. They weren't reaching out because they didn't care. They were regrouping. I found out how the following Monday, when my assistant forwarded me an email marked urgent. It wasn't from my family. It was from a journalist. Subject line, question regarding early influences behind NARA systems. I read it twice. Then a third time. Someone was feeding them a story. A revised version of me. The article draft arrived that afternoon. It was subtle. Clean. Professionally written. And poisonous. It framed NARA systems as a collaborative evolution, hinting that my early exposure to family financial infrastructure played a formative role. That the firm I'd distanced myself from might have been an unofficial incubator. No direct lies. Just implication. Enough to blur ownership. Enough to plant doubt. Enough to make future negotiations complicated. I leaned back in my chair and laughed once. Short. Sharp. So this was their move. If they couldn't access me, they'd access my story. I didn't call them. I called my board. Within an hour, legal, PR, and compliance were aligned. But before any response went out, I did something unexpected. I wrote my own statement. Not defensive. Not angry. Precise. I built NARA systems in isolation, it read. Not because I lacked support, but because independence was necessary. Any attempt to rewrite that history misunderstands both the work and the cost. We released it publicly. With receipts. Timelines. Documentation. Third-party verification. The truth, clean and unembellished, is devastating when someone's strategy relies on fog. The backlash was immediate. Not toward me. Toward them. People don't like manipulation when it wears a familiar face. By evening, the article was quietly pulled. By morning, the firm's partners were distancing themselves. And by noon, my phone rang. It was my brother. The one who always knew how to sound reasonable. "Darian," he said carefully. "This has gone too far." I almost admired the phrasing. Not "we went too far." "This has gone too far. You should have stopped it," he continued. "Now people are asking questions." "Yes," I said. "That's what truth does. You didn't have to make it public. You didn't have to make it false," I replied. Silence. "Then, you're tearing the family apart." "No," I said evenly. I stopped holding it together alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anxiety. From clarity. I realized something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. Choosing distance. Choosing boundaries. Choosing not to translate myself into something palatable for them. And that terrified them. Because families built on hierarchy don't survive autonomy. The next morning, a final email arrived. Not legal. Personal. From the man who raised me. Short. Direct. We need to meet. This ends now. I stared at the screen. And for the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt taller than the history trying to pull me backward. I replied with one sentence. No. It ends when I say it does. Then I blocked the address. Hours later, the call came from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Instead, I walked out of my office and into the city. The same streets I'd built everything on. The same anonymity that once felt like rejection, now felt like freedom. They were losing control. And the more they fought it, the clearer the truth became. They never wanted me strong. They wanted me manageable. They didn't stop. Not when I blocked numbers. Not when I declined meetings. Not when silence made it clear I was done negotiating my worth. They stopped only when they needed something. It happened 3 weeks later. A message came through my assistant, flagged personal, not business. The firm was in trouble. Serious trouble. A regulatory audit. A frozen account. A partner pulling out at the worst possible moment. Liquidity was evaporating. Reputations were cracking. And suddenly, my name mattered again. They didn't say it directly. They never do. Instead, the language was soft. Strategic. Your experience could help clarify things. You understand systems better than anyone. We're still family. Family. The word felt foreign now. Like something from a language I no longer spoke. Against my better judgment, I agreed to one meeting. Neutral location. No lawyers. No assistants. Just truth. They arrived early. All 3 of them. Older. Smaller. Less certain. The room felt different without their confidence filling it. No grand gestures this time. No condescension disguised as concern. Just fear, carefully managed. We're not asking for money, the older man said quickly. I believed him. That wasn't the currency they needed. They wanted credibility. My credibility. They wanted my silence, or better, my endorsement. A signal to the outside world that they still mattered. That they still had access to the version of me people now respected. I won't fix this, I said calmly. The words landed heavier than shouting ever could. You could, my brother said. His voice cracked. Just once. You know you could. Yes, I replied. And that's why I won't. Confusion crossed their faces. Not anger. They truly didn't understand. I leaned forward. For years, I said, you spoke about me like I wasn't in the room. Like I was a liability you were managing, not a person you were raising. They shifted uncomfortably. You laughed when others mocked me, I continued. You minimized my work because you didn't recognize its shape. No one interrupted. You don't get to rewrite history now because the ending scares you. There it was. The breaking point. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just final. The older woman reached for my hand. I didn't pull away. But I didn't hold it either. We did what we thought was best, she said. I know, I replied. That's the problem. I stood. They didn't. For the first time, the physical difference mirrored the emotional one. I hope you recover, I said. And meant it. But you'll do it without me. My brother looked up, desperate now. So that's it? I paused. Not for them. For myself. Yes, I said. That's it. Outside, the air felt lighter. Not because I'd won. But because I'd stopped fighting a battle that was never about me becoming enough, it was about them never wanting to see me whole. I walked away knowing something important. They would survive. But they would never control me again. And that was the justice I needed. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It never does. From the outside, it looked like a slow unraveling, missed deadlines, quiet resignations, partnerships that mutually agreed to part ways. But I could see the pattern clearly. Systems fail the same way people do, first internally, then publicly. I wasn't involved. I didn't comment. I didn't advise. I didn't correct the narrative when my name was mentioned in whispers. I let reality do what it always does when left alone. 6 months later, my assistant forwarded me an article. No headline drama. No scandal language. Just facts. The firm had merged under pressure. Control diluted. Influence gone. The structure they'd built their entire identities around was now something unrecognizable. I felt nothing. Not satisfaction. Not sadness. Just distance. And distance, I learned, is a form of peace. My life had grown quieter in better ways. Mornings started without dread. Meetings were purposeful. People listened, not because of my title, but because of my clarity. I moved apartments. Not bigger. Just brighter. Plants on the windowsill. Light that stayed all afternoon. A space that felt earned. One evening, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't deleted, just muted. A single message. I hope you're well. That was it. No apology. No explanation. I stared at the screen longer than I expected. Then I archived the chat. Not blocked. Not deleted. Archived. Some chapters don't need endings. They just need to stop being reread. A year later, I was invited to speak at a closed founders forum. Small room. No cameras. Just people who had built things in silence. Afterward, someone asked me, what kept you going when no one believed in you? I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I stopped waiting for permission to exist. The room went quiet. That's when I knew the answer was true. I never repaired those relationships. I also never destroyed them. I simply stepped out of the role I was assigned. The disappointment. The project. The cautionary tale. And I became something else. Someone unmanageable. Sometimes justice isn't about watching others fall. It's about realizing you no longer need to look back to feel tall. I didn't win against them. I won myself back. And that turned out to be enough. Thank you for watching the video. Like it if you watched the video to the end and don't forget to subscribe. Have a nice day.